Here's how you can get free tomato plants all season long, and actually possibly even into next season. And as a bonus, I'll show you an easy way to take any tomato you want and turn it into 20 to 30 plants. Hey everyone, Dave with On Deck Gardening, and in this video I'm going to show you my process I use basically every single gardening season to generate as many free tomato plants as I would like. Now, there's a few reasons why I do this. The first reason is pests or disease issues. If any of my tomato plants have a pest problem or disease problem that ends up getting out of my control, I can simply remove that tomato plant and I have a backup to put in its place. The second reason is if I don't like the tomato. I have right now I think I'm growing 22 different types of tomatoes, and I have the staple ones that I grow every single year because I like those. But every season there's some new ones that I want to try out. And when they get ripe, and if I try it, I don't like it, I can pull that plant and I can put a backup plant in its place of one that I actually like. And the third reason, I call it my back burner reason, is if something crazy happens in the world and supermarkets, get wiped out of all the food like it was in 2020, I have a ton of tomato plants that I can plant to generate more food for me and my family. And even worst case scenario, just kind of thinking outside the box, you can use them to trade with people. Hopefully it never comes to either of those, but that's the back burner reason. Okay, so with that being said, first I need to distinguish the two different tomato plants. There's essentially 4 different types of tomato plants when you really think about it, but we're just going to focus on 2. So you have indeterminate and determinate tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes are more of a bush style tomato. They have a determined size they'll get. There's some that are dwarf and some of them that grow kind of big, but they have a determined size they'll get. They'll produce all of their tomatoes roughly around the same time, and then once they're ripe, the plant's done. However, some of them you could actually keep going throughout the season. If you look at my YouTube shorts, I showed you how I took my patio choice tomato and just pruned it properly so then it'll continue growing and producing for me. Now, indeterminate tomatoes, also known as vine tomatoes, sometimes when you buy seeds or starter plants, it might say vine or pole, but those are indeterminate tomato plants. Now, those ones actually have a growth that just goes all season long. They can get really, really tall. They'll produce for you all season long until your frost comes and basically kills the plant. Now, I've tried this process with determinate, and they don't really do well with this whole process, but indeterminate tomatoes, vine, pole, whatever you want to call them, does really, really well. So for starters, I'm going to show you an example of what I'm talking about. So this tomato plant is one of my favorites. It's called a Park's Whopper, and as you can see, it's growing up a pole per se, as indeterminates do. Now, in the beginning of the video, I said you can do this process and possibly have plants into next season. I actually grew this 3 years ago. I bought a starter plant and I've kept it going. Throughout the winter, they don't really produce during the winter, but I just kept it alive and I kept doing this entire process. So I bought this plant 3 years ago, and this is technically the original plant. It's just like a clone of it. So once it starts coming up, it's got the main stem going up here, and right over here, let me see if I can find a good one. Yep, right over here. This growing out right here is called a sucker. So you can see the main stem going up here, which is that, and then you have a leaf node, and right out of this armpit, which is what I always refer to it, this growth right here is basically a whole new plant. Now, when you're growing these types, depending on your space, you usually just always pinch these off. Like I have this one right here, I have a little one right there in the corner, so I just pinch it off. That way this plant could focus on producing just the tomatoes on the main stem. However, I like to let these grow about 8 inches or so, and then I just trim them off right there, which is the first step in this whole process. So that's what I'm gonna do. Right at the base of that sucker, I'm just gonna trim it off. And technically you could trim this down and plant this as is in soil, and it should root and grow depending on the time of the year. But I don't like doing that because in the past, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So instead I go through the next step of the process, which is putting it in a cup of water. Okay, so I'm set up on my little shelving station here. So I have a cup of water here. Always label your stuff. I can tell you from experience. Down by my fruit trees, I have 3 grapevines that are doing fantastic. However, when I planted them, I didn't label them, so I have zero idea what kind they are. Okay, so here's our cutting, the sucker. So you're not just gonna leave all these leaves on here, you're gonna wanna kind of trim this down. So just the stem is in the cup. So I'm gonna definitely cut this guy off. And if there's like a curve, which it's curved right there, I'm gonna trim it off right there. And I'm gonna trim off this one as well. And see, there's a good example of a sucker. There's a sucker growing from the sucker right there from the armpit. Okay, so we don't need that, and we don't even need that leaf node. So there's that. And then flowers, always trim those off because you don't want this to focus on producing any tomatoes. You're gonna want this just to focus on producing roots. So the flowers are gone, and it's a little taller than I would like. So I'm actually gonna trim off just a little bit more. So about 8 inches long. This thing was probably like 10 inches long. So about 8 inches long is perfect. Then all you're gonna do after that is just put it in your cup of water. Now, it's July right now, so I actually have to add a little water to these cups almost daily because of the evaporation. And I don't have this in direct sun. I actually, under that awning over there, that's where I always keep these because it's getting sunlight, but not direct sunlight with the heat. It's consistently been like 95-ish degrees, but it's still getting enough sun, and it's out of the direct sunlight, so it's not gonna really, really stress this out or just get it to wither away. It shouldn't because it's in water, but if you have the capability of putting it under some shade, but it's still getting sunlight, do that. There's my tomato harvest from this morning. So yeah, this is right here, the one that we just did. Now, after 2 to 4 weeks, it's gonna look like this. It's gonna grow roots. You don't have to add any nutrients or anything like that. It just starts producing roots just like this. And once it has a nice amount of roots like this, you need to move it into soil because the longer you leave it in there, some of these roots are gonna die back. And then I've noticed there will be almost like a disease issue with the cutting. So once there's a bunch of roots, nice grouping that are white and healthy, you're gonna transfer this into, well, I just keep using these red cups like that. So I could either throw out the water, cut the holes in the bottom, but I already have a bunch of these with holes in the bottom. Okay, we're at my bin of soil here, and I do plan on making a video showing how I mix soil. It does save you a lot of money opposed to buying raised bed gardening soil, which you can use it for this, but once I make the video, it's gonna save you a lot of money. So this is how I cut holes in the cup. I put 1 hole in the bottom, and then I put 2 slits on each side. That's really it. Then I'll set it on the soil, and then I'll just put in like a small handful and then press it down. The reason why is you don't want all this soil over time to start falling out. That's the only time you really press it down. The rest of the time I'm just hitting it against my hand. So I have the Sun Gold, which is the one I showed you guys. That looks really, really good. Shake it off. Now I'm gonna put it in the cup and make sure that all the roots are gonna be buried. Now this is a little too long, so I'm actually gonna snip off probably 1/2 inch from the bottom. So yeah, like 1/2 inch. This doesn't damage the plant, it's fine. In fact, tomato plants can take a lot of punishment. And that should be perfect now. So I'm gonna throw this in the cup, move the leaf, and all the roots are gonna be buried at this point. So you can see there's no roots above the line here. Now all I do is throw in a couple handfuls while holding it centered. Now when it's about half full, I like to put my hand over the top like this and just hold it so it's centered, and I tap it down. Again, I'm not packing in the soil. I'm letting it kind of get a little more dense though. Now as you can see, no matter how I move it, it's staying centered. So now I'm gonna put in a couple more handfuls. Kind of do the same thing here. And just a little bit more. Now, when there's about 1/2 inch of space left on top, I like to add granular fertilizer to it. You don't have to do that. There should be enough nutrients in the soil that you're using as is, but I like to have a little bit extra just for assurance because This is a small container, and the smaller the container, the faster the plant is going to suck up the nutrients. So I like to add just some granular fertilizer. And just for the record, this is Espoma tomato tone. I use a lot of Espoma products, and I'll add 1 tablespoon in here. And I just use my finger to massage it into the soil. This granular fertilizer doesn't really work unless it's within the soil, because it does take some microbes and whatnot to help break this stuff down. You can't just throw it on top of the soil. I mean, you can, but it's not gonna work as efficiently. So once it's massaged into the soil, and this is why I leave a little bit of room, because then I'm gonna put some soil on top of this, so it's for sure mixed in with some soil. Another handful or 2. And I'm gonna tap it again. And there you have it, planted. And I'm gonna water this right away, and probably in 2 to 3 days, because I want this to kind of, get used to its new home, I will add a water soluble fertilizer. You could use Miracle-Gro. A lot of people think Miracle-Gro will kill you or it's poison or whatever. It's not the case. In fact, if you really want to get scientific, whether it's organic or granular or liquid or synthetic, they're all chemicals at the end of the day. So you can use whatever you like. Okay, so nice and low. A good watering practice is to water, let it settle down for a little bit, even when they're in your 5-gallon buckets like I use or whatever you're using. Hit it with some water, let it get down in there. And I actually see it leaking out of the side on the bottom, so I know it's getting nice and wet. And do it one more time, and we're good and watered in. So you can see I have at least 1 backup for each tomato plant I'm growing, and this is how I like to keep them watered. I have a seed tray, I have the cups in there, they have the holes in the bottom. I add water, it's called bottom watering, and this enables for sure these plants to get an adequate amount of water when they need it. And you just gotta, like right now with the sun, it's super hot, I do have to add water every day, but until you're ready to plant, you could just leave them in here. So here's the one we just planted, and again, make sure you label the plants, but this thing's gonna keep growing, and at some point it's gonna outgrow this container. Here's an example. This is a sun gold, a cherry tomato, but look how large this thing is. So at this point, you have 2 options. The first option is potting it up, as it's called, when you're moving this into a bigger container. So what I like to use are just these yogurt containers. They're probably twice the amount of volume of soil, and I just pull out the tomato plant from that cup. I knock all the soil off, then it's just the root ball, and that goes in the bottom. I trim it as needed, and I fill it up the same way, add the granular fertilizer the same way, and then that has a new home, and it can keep on growing until you're ready to plant. Now, what do you do if it outgrows that container? You can see it's already producing tomatoes all over it. So if you're still not ready to plant this thing, this is what I do. Instead of potting it up into something bigger, I just take my pruners, prune off the top, stick it in a cup of water, and start the process all over again. Some of you probably shrieked when I just trimmed off the top of that, essentially kind of killing off the plant. But since I have so many of these, it's not that big of a deal. And those tomatoes, I can trim those off and they'll still ripen for me. They'll take some time. But yeah, you could just trim off the top and then stick that in a cup of water, just like I showed you guys earlier. Let this root, start it all over again. And an even better option would be to actually prune this. You see there's a sucker coming out right there. I can prune it right above this sucker here and prune off this leaf. If I keep watering this, this is actually going to take over as the top. And then you have one in water for another plant, and you still have this plant. So there's a lot of options for you. Okay, now for the bonus on how you could take a tomato and turn it into 20 to 30 plants. All you're gonna do is slice this like you're making a sandwich. So I don't know, this tomato, you might get like 5 slices out of it, maybe 4. So let's say it's 4 slices. So then I'm gonna take 4 containers. It could be these, it could be the red cups, whatever. This is kind of small, so I can even use the red cups. You're gonna fill the container with soil until there's about 3/4 of an inch from the top, and then you're gonna put in one slice of the tomato and then cover it with soil. So if I use this tomato, I'd probably get 4 or 5 of these, and you're just gonna water it daily until some of these seeds start to germinate. So once those seedlings get about 4 inches tall or so, I will take out the whole mass. I will separate the soil from all of the roots, then I'll separate the plants, and then I have all those individual plants that I can put in either the red cups or these cups or whatever, and then you're basically getting, you know, just from one tomato, a whole bunch of plants. I've done this in the past. I'm not doing it right now, so I can't show you what it looks like, but it is by far one of the easiest ways to just get a whole bunch of tomato plants in one shot. So there you have it. That's how you get free tomato plants all season long from just using cuttings from your tomato plants. I hope you found some information in this video that you can apply to your own garden. If you haven't started gardening, I highly encourage it. Again, we don't know what's on the horizon, but also there's nothing cooler than just walking outside and grabbing what you need when you need it. Make sure you like the video, make sure you subscribe to this channel, and if you have any questions at all, post them in the comments and I'll see you on the next one.